Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 390 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. In this episode, I conduct a deep dive on the 6.5 Creedmoor and the brand new 25 Creedmoor, informed by real-world data I have obtained at the range and afield for both cartridges. Now, believe it or not, this is the first cartridge comparison involving the 6.5 Creedmoor I have conducted since episode 203, released all the way back in June of 2022. That is over 3 years ago. Getting back to it, both cartridges are closely related, and there is a large amount of overlap in the best use cases of the 25 and 6.5 Creedmoor. But I think each one does have different strengths and weaknesses. Now, at least on paper anyway, you could make the argument that the 25 Creedmoor is the best cartridge in the Creedmoor family. We'll go over how much of an advantage it has in a couple different areas here shortly. In this episode, we'll discuss the overall design characteristics and performance specs of each round, then we'll compare how they stack up next to each other. I will also cover how both have performed for me afield. Before we get started, make sure you are on my email list. If you like the podcast, you will love the emails I send out every weekday about hunting, shooting, ballistics, etc. Sign up at the link in the show notes or at biggamehuntingpodcast.com/ebook. All right, now let's get started talking about the 25 versus 6.5 Creedmoor cartridges. We'll start by discussing the history and design characteristics of these two rounds briefly. Now, the 6.5 Creedmoor is a short-action rifle cartridge Dave Emery of Hornady Manufacturing, designed to meet criteria specified by Creedmoor Sports General Manager Dennis DeMille, who wanted an off-the-shelf, short-action rifle cartridge that was accurate enough to win shooting competitions like the national matches at Camp Perry, that also had less recoil than the 308, had rapid-fire barrel life comparable to the 308, and also had the loading recipe printed on the box. They also wanted this new cartridge to have less wind drift and a flatter trajectory than the old 308. Now, Emery and Joe Thielen, also of Hornady, did the legwork necessary to build this new cartridge themselves, and they used a modified 30 Thompson center case neck down to shoot 6.5mm or .264 caliber bullets. Now, the 30 TC is not a very well-known or widely used cartridge. In fact, it's the most famous thing about it is that it is the parent case for the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, Hornady partnered with TC in the early 2000s to build that cartridge for the new TC Icon rifle. The 30 Thompson Center is similar in size to a 308 Winchester, but Hornady released that cartridge using an early iteration of what is now known as Hornady's Superformance powder. And that cartridge actually delivered ballistics similar to the larger and more powerful 30-06. So for instance, the 30 TC could push a 150 grain bullet at nearly 3,000 feet per second and a 165 grain bullet at 27 to 2,800 feet per second. That's not bad performance at all, but it was a flop commercially. Hornady actually builds factory loads for the 308 Winchester that deliver that sort of performance now using Superformance powder. You can learn more about the 30 Thompson Center in my 30 caliber episode, which is number 286. In any case, the 30 Thompson Center uses a slightly shorter case than the 308 Winchester. It also has a little bit less taper, uses a steeper 30-degree shoulder. That shorter case length made it the perfect platform to use for the new 6.5mm cartridge Emery and Thielen were building. Why is this the case? Well, because that allows the cartridge to have more head height. Head height is the amount of space available for the bullet outside the case while staying within SAAMI specifications for the cartridge. Put simply, more head height facilitates the use of very long aerodynamic bullets without requiring them to be seated so deeply into the case they intrude into the powder column. So this meant the new 6.5mm cartridge, based on the relatively short 30 TC case, could better accommodate long, heavy, high BC bullets than, say, using a 308 Winchester case as a parent, like Remington did with the 260 Remington. Emery and Thielen gave their new cartridge a fast 1 8-inch rifling twist rate to properly stabilize those heavy, long, high BC bullets. They named it the 6.5 Creedmoor in honor of the Creedmoor matches and DeMille's company, Creedmoor Sports, and they released it to the world in 2008. Now, Emery and Thielen did a good job of designing this cartridge, and they checked off all of the boxes I listed earlier. A typical 6.5 Creedmoor load shoots a 140-grain bullet at around 2,700 feet per second. It doesn't have eye-popping ballistics, but it uses high BC bullets that retain energy and resist wind drift exceptionally well. It also has moderate recoil, and yes, it outperforms the .308 in all of those areas. Check out my episode comparing the .308 Winchester and the 6.5 Creedmoor for details. Link is in the episode description. Now, in addition to all of that, Emery and Thielen also incorporated many of the so-called modern cartridge design principles Outdoor Life shooting editor John Snow and I discussed in a recent interview, episode 366 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast, and those things improved the overall accuracy potential of their new cartridge. So for all of those reasons, the 6.5 Creedmoor has developed a reputation for great accuracy and has seen a great deal of success in the hands of competition shooters. Plus, that cartridge has also now successfully made the jump into the mainstream hunting community. Now, the funny thing about the 6.5 Creedmoor is that it was not an instant success. Hornady released it in 2008. It did okay in terms of sales, but it wasn't a barn burner right out of the gate. However, things changed around 2014, 2015, thereabouts, and it really started to take off as more and more hunters and shooters started to appreciate the benefits that cartridge provided. Now, some hunters look derisively at the 6.5 Creedmoor. They call it names like the 6.5 Needmore or the 6.5 Man Bun. But make no mistake about it, regardless of what anybody says, this is a capable round for use on medium game. People, of course, get carried away with the cartridge and they get in trouble using it in situations they shouldn't sometimes. But the 6.5 Creedmoor is a fantastic cartridge for what it is. It's a mild recoiling, sweet shooting round that performs well both at the range and afield under reasonable conditions. We'll talk in more detail about what I think are the ideal hunting use cases for the cartridge later in this episode, but real quick, I think it shines at the range and on medium game, deer, hogs, antelope, and the like. Sure, you can hunt bigger game with it, and sure, you can hunt smaller game with it, but those are what I think are the ideal use cases for the 6.5 Creedmoor cartridge. This brings us to the 25 Creedmoor now. Now, just like the name says, the 25 Creedmoor is nothing more than a 6.5 Creedmoor neck down to shoot 25 caliber bullets. Now, it seems like anytime a new round hits the market, somebody, somewhere, will wildcat the cartridge to use different diameter bullets. The .308 is a perfect example. People have wildcatted that round to shoot 22 caliber, 6mm, 25 caliber, 6.5mm, 7mm, .338 caliber, .358 caliber, and even .375 caliber bullets. Some of those wildcats are even SAMI standardized, like the .243 Winchester, the .260 Remington, the 7mm 08 Remington, the .338 Federal, and the .358 Winchester. Now, in any case, the 6.5 Creedmoor is no different, and there are lots of wildcats or former wildcats that are now SAMI standardized that are derived from the cartridge. Here is an excerpt from the 17th edition of Cartridges of the World talking about what at the time was a wildcat cartridge called the 250 Hillbilly. In 2015, Richard Mann, former editor of this book, wanted to create a better 257 Roberts. His idea was to neck down the 6.5 Creedmoor case and create a more modern short-action 257 caliber cartridge. Initially, he called it the 257 Wildcat, with the help of two other West Virginians, in parentheses, hillbillies, Mike Cyrus of Lehigh Defense and Jerry Dove at Dove Custom Guns. He was able to put the cartridge and rifle together and named it the 250 Hillbilly. End of quote. Now, Richard Mann is probably not the first guy to do what he did with necking down the 6.5 Creedmoor down to 25 caliber, but he was the first guy to do it and write about it. Now, I mentioned this in episode 328 on all of the current, at the time anyway, SAMI standardized 25 caliber cartridges, but bullet selection is historically a weak point for the 25 caliber bore diameter. This is due to the slower twist rates a lot of those cartridges use. For instance, the 250 Savage has a 1 in 14 twist rate. 257 Roberts, 25-06, 257 Weatherby all have a 1 in 10-inch twist rate. Those are all very old cartridges. The 25-06 is the newest of all the 25 cals still in common use. Remington standardized it 56 years ago in 1969. This has slowly changed in the past 10 years. For instance, the 131 grain Blackjack Ace bullet really changed everything. That was one of the first really popular high BC 25 caliber projectiles. Now, since then, there have been a couple of offerings from Berger, and Hornady released the 134 grain ELD match in 2024. But prior to that, there were lots of legacy bullets, lots of stuff around 100 grains and topping out around 117 to 120 grains on the high end for big game. And there was some lighter stuff for varmints, right? 75 grain, 80 grain bullets, stuff like that. But the thing all of those bullets had in common was they used a very old, more traditional bullet design, and you were looking at a lot of stuff with BCs in the 0.3, 0.4 range, and not much better than that. Even the 110 grain ELDX Hornady produces for cartridges like the 25-06 and 257 Weatherby only has a G1 BC of 0.465. Now, Richard Mann and I recently did an in-depth interview on the 25 Creedmoor, and listen to episode 388 to learn more about the development of the cartridge and the bullets he used and stuff like that. But bullet selection really hampered development of both that particular Wildcat and the 25 caliber bore diameter in general. Now, this is one of those problems. Is it a chicken or the egg sort of issue? The slow rifling twist rate on most 25 caliber rifles means high BC bullets won't shoot accurately, so manufacturers don't build them. And since there aren't any higher BC bullets to use, there's no need for manufacturers to speed up twist rates on their barrels to accommodate those bullets. Well, for various reasons, people eventually started building custom 25 caliber rifles with faster twist barrels. That got the ball rolling. The Blackjack Ace was the first bullet, and then, like I said, Berger and Hornady followed in subsequent years. Now, one thing that spurred this development was NRL Hunter power restrictions. Now, certain divisions in that competition require a minimum power factor of 38,000, and this is a very simple calculation. You just multiply bullet weight by muzzle velocity. This power factor restriction effectively eliminated the various low recoiling 6mm cartridges from use in those divisions because the heaviest 115 grain bullets available in that bore diameter only have a power factor of 376,000 when fired at the maximum allowed velocity in the competition of 3,275 feet per second. Now, the various 6.5mm cartridges do just fine in NRL Hunter competitions, but as is the case in any game, people are always looking for an equipment edge. So specifically, competitors wanted a round that was flat shooting, performed well in the wind, and didn't have much recoil. And this would facilitate spotting impacts and aid in positional shooting. And of course, this magical new round that would give them this hypothetical advantage also needed to meet power factor. Well, a 25 caliber cartridge firing the 131 grain Blackjack needs a muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second to meet power factor. And a cartridge only needs to fire a 134 grain ELD match at 2,835 feet per second to meet power factor. Well, that is achievable with the 25 Creedmoor. And yes, as you will learn here shortly, compared to the 6.5 Creedmoor, the 25 Creedmoor shoots flatter, performs better in the wind, and has less recoil. So not surprisingly, people started gravitating towards the 25 Creedmoor Wildcat during those competitions. And then companies started supporting the cartridge with more and more components. I think Alpha and Peterson were the first. They started producing brass, for instance, a couple years ago. You had Hornady with the 134 ELDM, and then Berger with the 133 and 135 grain bullets a couple years ago they started making. Hornady also started selling 25 Creedmoor brass in late 2024. Now, say what you will about Hornady, but they are good at recognizing a money-making opportunity. People were already using this round themselves as a Wildcat. Why not do what Remington did with the 25-06 standardize the round with SAAMI, start producing factory ammo in the cartridge to turn around and start selling to a lot of these same people, as well as other people who don't hand load but also wanted to use the cartridge. So the official announcement of the 25 Creedmoor SAAMI standardization came in the spring of 2025. This is one of the most telegraphed and least surprising cartridge announcements I've ever witnessed. Now, Hornady has since released 2 factory loads for the 25 Creedmoor, 128 grain ELDX in the Precision Hunter line at an advertised velocity of 2,850 feet per second, and 134 grain ELD match bullet in the match line going at an advertised velocity of 2,800 feet per second. I will discuss this in more detail shortly, but long story short, the cartridge has a slight edge over certain 6.5 Creedmoor loads in trajectory, wind, and recoil. It's a great combination for use at the range. It also works well afield, both on big game and predators. In fact, Richard Mann calls the 25 Creedmoor the perfect triple threat cartridge. I've hunted with the cartridge a fair bit myself. I actually took it to Africa in the summer of 2025. It worked very well for me. I'll discuss all of this in a little bit more detail later in this episode, but first we need to talk about the relative cartridge sizes of the 25 Creedmoor and the 6.5 Creedmoor. These two cartridges are very, very similar in overall size and dimensions. That is not surprising. They are very closely related. The 25 Creedmoor is literally a 6.5 Creedmoor neck down to shoot 25 caliber bullets. They're both short action cartridges. They have the same overall length. They have the same rim and case head diameters. They have the same 30-degree shoulder, same case length. Powder capacity for each one is virtually identical as well. I measured case capacity of 5 pieces of empty brass from both cartridges, both from Hornady, and came up with 52.8 grains of water for the 25 Creed and 52.9 for the 6.5 Creedmoor. So yeah, that is virtually identical. I was seeing more variation in case capacity within individual pieces of brass for the same, for the 6.5 Creedmoor and for the 25 Creedmoor than I was seeing going from one to the other. Both cartridges have the same SAAMI spec maximum average pressure of 62,000 psi. Now, the 25 Creedmoor has a slightly more narrow neck because it uses .257 caliber bullets. The 6.5 Creedmoor uses .264 caliber bullets. That is a difference of 0.007 inches, or 7 thousandths of an inch. Another difference the two cartridges have is they have different SAAMI spec twist rates. 1 in 8 inches for the 6.5 Creedmoor, 1 in 7.5 inches for the 25 Creedmoor. So the 25 Creedmoor is a little bit faster. Now, both cartridges are designed to use long, heavy for caliber, high BC bullets, but there is a difference in the common bullet weights for each because they have a different bore diameter, and the fact that the 25 Creedmoor has a little bit faster twist rate. Now, while the 25 Creedmoor can use lighter varmint bullets and legacy big game hunting bullets, 2 factory loads available for it right now use the 128 grain ELDX and the 134 grain ELD match bullet. There are some other offerings, like some out there from Berger, that use bullets in the 130 to 135 grain range right now too. So you can go all the way down to about 70, 75 grains for the really light stuff, up through, the various 100, 110, 15, 117, 120 grain bullets, up to 134, 135 grain bullets on the high end. The heaviest bullet I'm aware of for the 25 Creedmoor right now is a 135 grain Berger long-range hybrid target bullet, .65 G1BC. 134 grain Hornady ELD match as a G1BC of .645. The 6.5 Creedmoor most often uses bullets in the 120 to 147 grain range. 120, 127 grain, 130 grain copper bullets are pretty common, and then 140, 143, and 147 grain lead core bullets are also very common. 140 grains probably the most popular bullet weight for this cartridge overall. You can go down to about 90 grains for the really light 6.5 millimeter varmint bullets. The 156 grain Berger Elite Hunter, that's the heaviest bullet I'm aware of for the cartridge right now, .679 G1BC. 147 grain ELD match has a .697 G1BC. All right, so how...
Hi, I'm Chris Gethard, and I'm very excited to tell you about Beautiful Anonymous, a podcast where I talk to random people on the phone. I tweet out a phone number, thousands of people try to call, I talk to one of them, they stay anonymous, I can't hang up, that's all the rules. I never know what's going to happen. We get serious ones. I've talked with meth dealers on their way to prison. I've talked to people who survived mass shootings. Crazy funny ones. I talked to a guy with a goose laugh, somebody who dresses up as a pirate on the weekends. I never know what's going to happen. It's a great show. Subscribe today, Beautiful Anonymous.
Do those small differences in their overall sizes of these two cartridges translate into different performance afield and at the range? Well, that's a good question. Now, I have shot ammo from both cartridges, and I have observed velocities for both are nearly identical to what is advertised when you're shooting out of a 24-inch long barrel. So that's what we'll use in this comparison in this episode. Now, since there are only two factory loads for the 25 Creedmoor, I'll use both in this comparison. The Hornady Precision Hunter load with the 128 grain ELDX bullet, .633 BC, and the Hornady Match load 134 grain ELD Match bullet, .645 BC. I'll compare those two loads to three 6.5 Creedmoor factory loads. One in the match line with a 140 grain ELD match bullet, .646 BC. Hornady's Precision Hunter load with 143 grain ELDX, .625 BC. And another load from the match line with 147 grain ELD match bullet, .697 BC. So how does all that shake out? Now, both 25 Creedmoor loads are faster than all of the 6.5 Creedmoor loads. The 25 Creedmoor loads are going 2,800, 2,850. The 6.5 Creedmoor loads are going around 2,700 feet per second. So the 25 is going 100 to 150 feet per second faster. That results in a flatter trajectory, about a half inch to an inch flatter at 300 yards and 2.5 to 5 inches flatter at 500 yards. So that's about a 5 to 15% difference. Now, the difference in trajectory is actually most stark with the two loads in the Precision Hunter line. Now, some people hunt with the match bullets, but the Precision Hunter loads are actually the only ones Hornady markets for hunting for these two cartridges that I've included in this comparison. But this is a specific case where the 25 Creedmoor not only has a 150 foot per second advantage in muzzle velocity, but it also shoots a higher BC bullet of nearly identical construction. Now, I personally like to have a minimum impact velocity of 2,000 feet per second for optimum bullet performance while hunting. That is a guideline, not a hard and fast rule. That is also personal preference why I selected 2,000 feet per second. But in general, faster impact velocities will result in faster and more dramatic bullet mushrooming of a bullet of a given type. The opposite is also true, and if the bullet is going too slow when it hits the animal, it won't mushroom much or at all, and you run the risk of it just penciling through the animal and not causing much damage. I am being very conservative with a 2,000 foot per second minimum impact velocity, and there are bullets designed to work at impact velocities slower than that. The ELDX is one such bullet. Hornady says it will still expand down to about 1,600 feet per second of impact velocity, but I've also heard things start to become erratic below 1,800 foot per second of impact velocity. The bottom line is you can draw the line at your minimum impact velocity wherever you want. But regardless of where you draw the line, if you draw it at the same place for both cartridges, the 25 Creedmoor will hit that threshold farther downrange than the 6.5 Creedmoor with the two ELDX loads I'm talking about in this comparison. In this particular case, that works out to about 110 yards of additional range for the 25 Creedmoor over the 6.5 Creedmoor with my preferred 2,000 feet per second of impact velocity. Specifically, 635 yards for the 25 Creedmoor versus 525 yards for the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, not only is it still going faster downrange, but the 128 grain ELDX also has about 4% more retained energy at 500 yards. Not a tremendous difference, but an edge nonetheless. Now, that 147 grain ELD match bullet actually performs best out of all three 6.5 Creedmoor loads in this comparison. It is going nearly as fast as the other two 6.5 loads, but it uses that ridiculously high BC 147 grain ELD match projectile. So it hangs on to that velocity better than everything else in this comparison. It has the most retained kinetic energy downrange of everything, and it also has the flattest trajectory of the 6.5 loads. But it also still has about 7% more bullet drop than the most arcing 25 Creed factory load at 500 yards. So the exact details do vary a little bit here, but so far the 25 Creed has an advantage in terms of a flatter trajectory, and both 25 Creed loads reach their minimum recommended impact velocity farther downrange. With the exception of that 147 grain 6.5 load, both 25 Creed loads also have a little bit more retained energy than the 6.5 Creedmoor too. Now let's talk about performance in the wind. Now, assuming identical wind conditions, wind deflection is dependent on bullet velocity and BC, and BC plays a surprisingly large role here. So with this in mind, that 147 grain ELD match load performs the best in terms of the wind, but that load actually has virtually identical performance to the two 25 Creed loads, and just 0.3 to 0.4 inches separates them at 500 yards. So like I said, they're essentially identical. Now, both 25 Creedmoor loads have essentially the same wind deflection as each other out to 500 yards. And other than that 147 grain 6.5 Creedmoor load, which they basically match, the 25 Creedmoor outperforms the 6.5 Creedmoor in wind deflection. All right, that's not surprising. We're talking about loads shooting a faster bullet with either essentially identical or a slightly better ballistic coefficient versus the 140 grain ELD match and 143 grain ELDX 6.5 Creedmoor loads. Once again, not a gigantic advantage, and we're looking at about 1 inch less wind deflection at 500 yards for the 25 Creedmoor. Now let's talk about recoil. The 25 Creedmoor comes out on top in the recoil department when comparing these ELDX and ELD match loads for each cartridge. I pulled bullets from a couple of cartridges from the Hornady Precision Hunter and match factory loads for both cartridges, weighed the powder contained in each cartridge, then calculated recoil for an 8-pound rifle. 128 grain 25 Creedmoor load had 13.2 foot-pounds of recoil energy. 134 grain 25 Creedmoor had 13.6 foot-pounds of free recoil energy. 143.65 Creedmoor, 13.9 foot-pounds of recoil energy. And the 147.65 Creedmoor had 15.5 foot-pounds of free recoil energy. Now, 6.5 Creedmoor, very shootable cartridge, but the fact remains the 25 Creedmoor does have the edge here, especially compared to that 147 grain 6.5 load. Now, NRL Hunter matches have a 380,000 power factor minimum for some of their divisions. They have one division where you can use sealed factory ammo, others where you have to meet power factor. You calculate power factor by multiplying bullet weight by muzzle velocity. Both of the 25 Creedmoor factory loads fall a little short of this, but you can easily hit that power factor with the 134 grain ELD match from the 25 Creedmoor with a muzzle velocity of 2,850 feet per second. Actually 2835, but if you go a little bit above it to 2850, you got a little bit of a buffer. That is a very achievable hand load for the 25 Creedmoor. That does bump up recoil a little bit since you're using a little bit more powder to push that bullet a little bit faster. In that case, we have about 13.7, 13.8 foot-pounds of free recoil energy. So certainly a little more, but still a little less than the 6.5 Creedmoor 143 grain load and quite a bit less than the 147 grain ELD match load. Now, I can hear somebody saying right now, you're telling me there are some man-bun-wearing weaklings out there who can't handle 6.5 Creedmoor recoil and they need to shoot something even lighter than that. I hear you. And, I've said it before, I'll say it again. We're slicing the onion awful thin with these two cartridges. But I'll say, though, that in a situation where every bit of recoil reduction is important, like you're in a shooting competition and you're trying to spot impacts, you're doing some positional shooting in odd positions or at odd angles or something like that, that little bit of recoil reduction can matter. It's less important for the typical hunter, though. Now, I will say that it is also something that is nice to have for a smaller and or more recoil-shy shooter. My son used a 25 Creedmoor in Africa this past summer, killed an impala with it. He weighs about 65 pounds soaking wet. He shoots that 25 Creedmoor very well, but it's near the upper threshold of recoil for him right now. He's only 9 years old. He's still a relatively inexperienced hunter and shooter. I'm trying to build good habits. So I started him out with a 22 long rifle, and then a 223. Then I had him shooting the 22 Creedmoor, and we fell into a nice niche with the 25 Creedmoor. And he was using that because that's what I had. But if I only had a 6.5 Creedmoor, for instance, I'm sure he would be shooting that just fine. But I think the 25 is a little bit better for him right now. Now let's talk about barrel life. On average, when dealing with barrels of similar quality that are used and maintained in a similar manner, the 6.5 Creedmoor will, on average, have a slightly longer barrel life than the 25 Creedmoor. Both cartridges run at the same pressure. They both use almost identical amounts of a very similar, if not exactly the same powder, right? I looked through Hornady load data, and there are several loads for both cartridges that are essentially identical. The only real difference here is the 25 Creedmoor has a slightly smaller bore diameter. So for this reason, the 25 Creedmoor will probably have a slightly longer barrel life. Jaden Quinlan from Hornady estimated an average of 2,000 to 3,000 rounds of barrel life for the 6.5 Creedmoor in a spreadsheet he and the folks at Hornady published online. There's no 25 Creedmoor on there, but like I said, it's probably a little, but not significantly less than the 6.5 Creedmoor. What about accuracy? Now, Hornady implemented some design principles with both cartridges to help optimize accuracy. Check out Big Game Hunting Podcast episode 366, where John Snow and I discuss this in depth for more details. But long story short, cartridges with a long neck for adequate neck tension on long, high BC bullets, a steep shoulder for head spacing, a fat case with minimal body taper, and a snug freebore diameter are all conducive to accuracy. The 25 and the 6.5 Creedmoor have all of these characteristics. However, the slightly lower recoil of the 25 Creedmoor will possibly translate into better accuracy afield. I know this is the internet. Everybody shoots great all the time. Recoil doesn't bother them, but all other things being equal, most people will just shoot more accurately with a rifle generating less recoil. But that said, though, these two cartridges are very similar in the recoil department. And for instance, a really lightweight 25 Creedmoor will probably recoil more than a really heavy 6.5 Creedmoor rifle. So you're going to have variations like that, but all other things being equal, right? Exact same rifle, for each cartridge, all that stuff. They're both well designed. They have a good recoil pad, muzzle brake, same suppressor, whatever system you have. If it's the same on both, the 25 Creedmoor is going to have less recoil. You're probably going to shoot a little bit better with it. Now let's talk about rifle and ammo availability. We'll start with ammo. The 6.5 Creedmoor is incredibly popular. Lots of ammo companies have picked it up in the last couple of years. It is easily one of the top 10, maybe top 5 most popular centerfire rifle cartridges on the market today. On the other hand, only Hornady makes 25 Creedmoor factory ammo right now, and they make two loads, right? That Precision Hunter load and the match load I talked about earlier in this comparison. Midway USA lists 114 6.5 Creedmoor loads on their website versus just 7 for the 25 Creedmoor. And yes, you heard me right. In addition to Hornady, Choice Ammo makes several 25 Creedmoor custom hand loads using legacy bullets. They have a load with 110 grain Accubon, one with 120 grain Partition, 115 grain Barnes, stuff like that. So it's not high volume, mass produced factory ammo from a company like Hornady, Winchester, or Remington, and you are limited right now anyway to using those legacy bullets in it, but it's also not like you have to hand load it yourself right now either. So that is welcome news from Choice Ammo that they've already picked up the cartridge. But even with that, the 25 still can't hold a candle to the 6.5 Creedmoor in terms of availability, and you can get the 6.5 Creedmoor in darn near any factory load you can think of right now. Plus, you can also get custom hand loads of 6.5 Creedmoor ammo from companies like Hendershots, Pendleton Ammo, Copper Creek, Choice Ammo, all of that stuff. And yes, you can get plain old Winchester PowerPoint and Remington Core Lock ammo in the 6.5, but not the 25 Creedmoor right now anyway. Now let's talk about rifles. Situation here, very similar to ammo. Sportsman's Warehouse lists 254 6.5 Creedmoor rifles on their website, compared to just one 25 Creedmoor rifle. Midway USA lists 11 for the 25 Creedmoor, 155 for the 6.5. Same with ammo. Almost any rifle company you can think of makes 6.5 Creedmoor rifles. That is one of the, if not the most popular chambering for many companies too. On the other side of the coin, though, Horizon Firearms and Fierce Firearms both make 25 Creedmoor rifles, and Weatherby has also picked up the 25 Creedmoor too. Now, Horizon and Fierce are both smaller rifle manufacturers. They both make a point of adopting new rifle cartridges when they hit the market. They both picked up the 22 Creedmoor almost immediately. Well, so it wasn't surprising to me that they picked up the 25 Creedmoor too. Now, both companies make pricey rifles, though. I actually have a Horizon Fanatic in both 22 Creedmoor and another one in 25 Creedmoor. I love both of those rifles. They shoot fantastic. Now, Horizon also offers the 25 Creedmoor in their Vandal X and Vandal Prime models, too. Now, Weatherby picked up the 22 and 25 Creedmoor at the same time in 2025. It's offering both cartridges in their Model 307 rifle. That rifle starts out at just over $1,000. And the 25 Creedmoor is also available in their Mark V rifle, too. Now, Weatherby is a company, I think, that does a good job of balancing a respect for their heritage and also does a good job embracing new developments. So I'm not surprised to see them offering the 25 Creedmoor. I think Weatherby is also a good candidate for some other developments along these lines that I'll talk more about later in this episode. So the 25 Creedmoor is still a very new cartridge. There's not a lot of rifle or ammo availability for it right now, but things are heading in the right direction. Consumers need a good selection of rifles and ammo to have a cartridge survive, and that needs to be available at various price points. It doesn't do a lot of good if you got 20 rifle manufacturers that only make $5,000 rifles in a chambering. So it's good to have some at that price point. You also need some at that mid and lower tier price point, I think, for it to really catch on. So we're not there yet, but we might be heading there soon. Now, the 22 Creedmoor got SAMI approval back in 2024, and this year in 2025, Ruger picked up that cartridge. They now offer it in their American Generation 2 rifle. That rifle retails for less than $1,000. That was a massive development for the 22 Creedmoor. We'll see if that happens with the 25 Creedmoor in the next year or so. All right, now let's talk about how these two rounds perform in ballistic gel. We'll start out with the Hornady Precision Hunter loads for both. As you would expect, there's very similar overall performance in gel from both. Both made large wound cavities with lots of fragmentation. The 6.5 Creedmoor did make a larger wound. Penetration was similar for both. Weight retention was also similar too. The 6.5 143 grain ELDX bullet did have a little bit more weight retention than the 128, but that makes sense because it impacted going slower. Now, the 134 grain ELD match actually made a larger wound than the 147 grain ELD match, but the 147 grain ELD match penetrated better. Now, the shape and character of these wounds were also similar to each other. Both were different from those made by the ELDX. In each case, the match bullets made wounds that had a longer neck, they had more fragmentation, and more of an exaggerated football-type shape than the wounds made by the ELDX. So when I say football, I mean you got a neck where not much happens, very wide wound cavity for a short period of time, and then it very quickly drops down back to a very narrow wound cavity, and the bullet keeps going. That's what the match bullets did. The ELDX bullets tended to have a wider spot closer to the face of the gel and then would gradually taper off. Now, the 147 grain ELD match had a highly asymmetric expansion exhibited with the bullet. It just had a little bit of mushrooming of the lead core and a giant chunk of the copper jacket kicked out to the side at an odd angle. So depending on where or how you measure expansion, that bullet could range from just under 2x to nearly 3x expansion. None of the other bullets behaved like that. Now, the 134 grain ELD match only penetrated 17 to 18 inches. Both ELD-X bullets penetrated 21 to 22 inches. 147 grain ELD match penetrated 23 to 24 inches. So it actually penetrated better than anything else I used in this comparison. In addition to those loads, I've also shot a Barnes load for the 6.5 Creedmoor, shooting 127 grain LRX into ballistic gel. That load had fantastic penetration, about 30 inches of penetration, but it made a much narrower wound than the ELD-X and ELD match loads. Nearly 100% weight retention for that bullet, about 2.5x expansion. Now, I have not shot any copper loads for the 25 Creedmoor, but I have tested one custom hand load using 120 grain North Fork Semi Spitzer. That is a bonded soft point bullet with a solid rear shank. I'll talk more about the details of the hunt later, but I used that load in the 25 Creedmoor in Africa when I went to South Africa this past summer. I also hunted a little bit with the Precision Hunter ammo. Well, I shot that North Fork load into ballistic gel. That bullet made a wound nearly as large as the one produced by the ELD-X bullet from the 25 Creedmoor, but the North Fork also penetrated significantly better. That was about 25 to 26 inches of penetration for that load for the North Fork 25 Creed load versus 21 to 22 for the two ELD-X loads for the 25 and 6.5 Creed. I have not shot one, but I am sure a 140 grain North Fork Semi Spitzer would have similar performance for the 6.5 Creedmoor. So I say all of that to say that in general, performance is similar in ballistic gel for both cartridges, and there's actually much more variation going between different types of bullets for a single cartridge than there is going from one cartridge to another using the same bullet type. I need to give my normal disclaimer, though. Results in clear gel, like I used in the test I was just discussing, don't normally translate one-to-one into real-world situations on game. Bullets tend to penetrate better, but not make as large of a wound cavity in clear gel like this versus a real-life animal. Animals also aren't completely homogeneous like gel is either. So results should be taken as a general trend. I'm not saying if a bullet penetrates X number of inches in gel, it will penetrate exactly that far in real-life animals from every angle, regardless of what it hits. I'm saying that if a bullet demonstrates wide, shallow penetration in gel, it will probably produce wide, shallow penetration in animals. Likewise, if bullet A penetrates better than bullet B in gel, well, it'll probably penetrate better than bullet B in an animal. So take all that for what you will. But the general trends I just described in ballistic gel do tend to match up with what I experienced on game. I'll talk to you about that here shortly. So which cartridge is right for you? Well, first, I'll sum up the advantages of each one. The 25 Creed is faster, it has a flatter trajectory, generally does better in the wind, has less recoil, and carries as much or a little bit more kinetic energy downrange compared to equivalent loads in the 25 Creedmoor. Now, the 6.5 Creedmoor does well in those areas, just not quite as good as the 25 Creedmoor, but it does have a massive advantage over the 25 Creedmoor in terms of rifle and ammo availability. Like I said earlier, one could make the argument the 25 Creedmoor is the so-called best Creedmoor cartridge, and you could probably see why that is the case, especially in the hands of competitive shooters trying to get every possible advantage at a match. I'm not sure how much of a difference those little changes make in the real world for most hunters, though. People like to poke fun at the 6.5 Creedmoor for being a quote-unquote weak and ineffective cartridge, and the 25 Creedmoor is even smaller than the 6.5 Creedmoor. That has not been my experience with either one. In my opinion, most of the complaints people have about the 6.5 Creedmoor stem from a combination of people using inappropriate ammo for the situation and/or using it under conditions they have no business hunting under. For instance, the 6.5 Creedmoor is a cartridge where someone can buy a Ruger American Predator rifle, a Vortex scope, a couple boxes of Hornady Precision Hunter or match ammo, and consistently be banging steel at 1,000 yards that same day for less than $1,000 all in. This is the first widely available cartridge where conditions allowed for performance like that from a normal shooter. Heck, I've shot the 6.5 Creedmoor cartridge on targets all the way out to a mile. Now, I used a nicer setup than what I just described, but you get the idea. And hitting that target at a mile was almost shockingly easy with that setup with the cartridge. That does not mean that I or the hypothetical hunter I just described should be shooting at animals at 1,000 yards with it. But the confidence that comes from that sort of performance I just described at the range can be tempting to some people. That's especially true with those who are less experienced hunting. Shooting an animal at 600 yards with anything is asking for trouble unless the hunter really knows what he or she is doing. So that is one explanation for complaints about the cartridge. I'll talk to you about bullets in a second. Now, like I also mentioned earlier, the 25 Creedmoor and compared to the 6.5 Creedmoor, that's slicing that onion pretty darn thin. Obviously, there is a lot of overlap in the best use cases for each cartridge, and basically anything you would do with one, you could reasonably do with the other. So I would hunt deer, hogs, antelope, black bear, African plains game, even elk and moose with both, with appropriate ammunition and at appropriate ranges. Neither cartridge would necessarily be my first choice for them, but yes, I would hunt moose, elk, and the like with the 25 or the 6.5 Creedmoor. But at the same time, I'm also not going to go out and shoot an elk with it at 600 or 800 yards either. I'm also going to use the right ammunition for the circumstances too. For instance, that ELDX bullet is wonderful for what it is designed for, but I personally think it is also the source of a lot of problems for the 6.5 Creedmoor and the 25 Creedmoor when used under the wrong conditions. This bullet is designed for use at extended range. It performs best at slow to moderate velocity impacts. Performance can be uneven if it is going too fast when it hits an animal. For instance, the 143 grain ELDX performed beautifully on a pronghorn I shot a couple years ago. Range was 175 to 200 yards. At that range, that bullet had slowed down to below 2,500 feet per second. It made a massive wound through the animal's chest, exited the other side. He ran less than 30 yards after the shot and tipped over. And after I shot him, he spun around and started running. And so his offside shoulder was facing me when he was running, and he had already had a red spot about the size of a grapefruit on the off side of his chest. Shoot that exact same animal in the exact same spot at the same angle at 50 yards, and the situation will be different. It probably won't, quote unquote, blow up on the shoulder like those bullets get accused of doing sometimes, but that ELDX probably wouldn't exit either. It might, but probably won't. It really depends. That's not necessarily a problem on an open country antelope hunt. That antelope's probably still going to die quickly. It's not going to go far, and it's going to be pretty easy to find when it does die. But recovering an animal can be much more challenging in thicker conditions with little or no blood trail, and that's often the case if the bullet does not exit. I received lots of complaints about the 6.5 Creedmoor from hunters, and many of them tell me the same story. They shoot a deer at 50 to 75 yards with their 6.5 Creedmoor, it ran off. Sometimes they find it, sometimes they don't. Poor shots are undoubtedly to blame for some of those mishaps, but many of those people eventually find the deer after a long and difficult tracking job. And the story is the same each time. They used Hornady Precision Hunter ammo with that ELDX because it shot great in their rifle. They made what turned out to be a good shot on a white-tailed deer at close range, and it ran off and either left no blood or a very sparse blood trail. The deer ran 50, 75, 100 yards away, dies in really thick stuff. So that was a fatal shot, and it was placed appropriately, but the bullet didn't exit. There's not a real good blood trail. Recovery was tough. I experienced that myself on a monster hog in Texas with the 6.5 Creedmoor a couple years ago. I experienced it again with the 25 Creedmoor in Africa this year. Long story short, I shot an impala at about 50 to 75 yards. It was not very far away. Quartering to me, I shot it in the shoulder. The impala staggered, jumped into a thicket, and I walked up to where it was standing, and I could see where its hoof prints were, where it dug in when it started running. But it might as well have just disappeared At least that's how it looked into that thicket initially. And we looked and looked and looked, and we did eventually find it. It went less than 50 yards after the shot, but that bullet did not exit. There was not a single drop of blood on the ground. We just made a grid search of likely locations and ended up finding the Impala in there. Now, that bullet was placed well, completely shredded. The near side lung hit the back of the other lung, caused some damage to the liver as well. But like I said, did not exit, not one drop of blood on the ground. Now, the situation was similar on that hog I was just telling you about. In each case, the animals went less than 100 yards. The shots were well placed. The bullet inflicted massive damage to the vitals, but it's just really hard to find an animal in a situation like that where you're dealing with thick conditions and you don't have much of a blood trail. And you get a much bigger blood trail on average when the bullet exits. Now, I also used those 120 grain North Fork semi-spitzers in the 25 Creedmoor on this same hunt in Africa. Now, those were custom hand loads made by Lonnie Cribb with superior ammunition. They shot great in my rifle. Muzzle velocity, I want to say, is about 2950 feet per second. Those bullets produced very impressive wound cavities in ballistic gel that rivaled those produced by some popular 30 caliber hunting loads. Plus, these North Forks penetrated very well too, several inches deeper in gel versus the ELDX bullets in 25 caliber that I shot. Performance was similar in real life. Those North Fork bullets devastated the vitals of all the animals I shot with them. I shot a Vol reed buck, an Inyala, and an Impala with them. Nothing went more than 50 yards after the shot. All left very easy to follow blood trails. Furthermore, I also shot a dead Cape buffalo with 120 grain North Fork from the 25 Creed in Africa as well. Another hunter had already killed it. We were done with photos, all of that stuff. I shot that buffalo at like 10 yards on a strongly quartering 2-shot straight through that creature's massive shoulder. Went through all that muscle, shoulder blade, punched through the ribs, made a big hole through the lungs of the buffalo, then it disappeared into the rumen. Now, to be clear, I am not advocating using either the 25 or the 6.5 Creedmoor for buffalo hunting, even with North Fork bullets. I only say this just to provide an example of what the 25 Creedmoor, and I'm sure the 6.5 Creedmoor would have performed in a similar manner with a similar bullet, but how well those cartridges can penetrate and how much damage they can cause when paired with the right bullet. So don't tell me the 25 or the 6.5 Creedmoor is weak or ineffective, because they are not. Like anything else, they need to be used appropriately. In that vein, Tyler Friel from Outdoor Life killed a real nice grizzly bear in Alaska with a 6.5 Creedmoor shooting a 140 grain Nosler partition bullet. I think that's another wonderful bullet for that sort of work, and it performed great for him. But that said, both the Nosler partition and the traditional North Fork bullets are poor choices for open country hunts where you need to shoot at 300 plus yards. In a situation like that, the ELDX or a similar bullet is a wonderful choice. Now, moving on, both cartridges, both the 25 and the 6.5 Creedmoor, are also great for use up in the mountains for game like sheep or mountain goat. In that same vein, these are excellent cartridges to pair with an ultra-lightweight hunting rifle. To that end, Wilson Combat now owns ultralight arms and, among other offerings, produces their Nula Model 20 or their new ultralight arms Model 20 rifle in 6.5 Creedmoor. That's an excellent chambering for that rifle. There's no 25 Creed offerings there yet, but I think that would be a good addition to that line down the road, potentially. Now, in that same vein, both cartridges are also wonderful for use in a situation for a hunter that needs or just prefers something with less recoil. Now, I'll just say one last time, the 25 Creedmoor does outperform the 6.5 Creedmoor on paper and has a little bit less recoil to boot. But let's also not kid ourselves here. These are very small advantages it has in each area. All things considered, I personally lean towards the 6.5 Creedmoor for bigger game. Not that I wouldn't hunt an elk with a 25 Creedmoor, for instance, with the right bullet, but I just think the 6.5 is better when both are using appropriate bullets. Both are wonderful for deer and the like. Now, likewise, I would lean more towards the 25 Creedmoor for use on predators and varmints. I think that's probably the best crossover cartridge on the market right now that is perfectly at home on deer and varmints. And there is a better selection of 25 caliber varmint bullets than is the case for the 6.5. For instance, you could shoot a 75 grain VMAX at 3,500 feet per second out of a 25 Creedmoor. Now, the 6.5 Creedmoor will shoot something like a 90 grain VMAX at 3,300 feet per second. Both are good. I think the 25 is just a little bit better here. Now, the 25 Creedmoor also has that small edge over the 6.5 in certain competitive shooting competitions for the reasons I mentioned earlier. This is what Richard Mann is talking about when he says the 25 Creedmoor is a triple threat cartridge. It's great for big game, varmints, and for competitive shooting. But on the other hand, the 6.5 Creedmoor does have a much better selection of rifles and ammo right now. Now, I have rifles chambered in both cartridges. I like both cartridges. I don't think you need to buy one if you already have the other, though. Unless you just want another gun or you want to optimize for a certain situation, which is also totally fine. Really, the situation here is similar to what I described in a different episode with the 375 H&H and 9.3 by 62. Yeah, the 25 Creedmoor is a little bit better in these areas, and the 6.5 Creedmoor is a little bit better in these areas. But just like how the number 100 is bigger than 99, let's not kid ourselves here and say there's a tremendous difference between those two numbers or these two cartridges either. I'm not certain what the future holds for the 25 Creedmoor. Hornady did a very soft launch with it, complete opposite of what they did with the 7mm PRC, for instance. So does that mean they have soft expectations for the cartridge? Now, even though they're the only company making ammo for it, or only big company anyway, they seem to be making a lot of 25 Creedmoor ammo, and availability seems to be pretty good as I record this. I'm also not quite sure what to make of the 25 Creedmoor. Like I keep saying, I think this cartridge was developed specifically because it does offer that small edge to some competitive shooters. People were using it anyway, so Hornady figured they'd legitimize it and make money selling those people ammo. Fine. I will say that I feel pretty confident this is going to open the floodgates for new bullet development in 25 caliber. That is a very neglected bore diameter, especially when it comes to higher BC bullets. Things were bad with the 270 bore diameter until the 27 Nosler and 6.8 Western came out a few years ago. Things were even worse with the 25 caliber bore diameter. One thing we have not seen to this point is any AccuBond long-range offerings from Nosler. They have a 25 caliber regular AccuBond, but that is it. So I would not at all be surprised to see one of those come out. Maybe we'll see a 25 caliber terminal ascent bullet from Federal too. Something from Sierra or Spear or something like that down the line as well. At least initially, those bullets will certainly be geared primarily towards stuff like the 25 Creedmoor. Maybe we will see a move to adapt rifles in legacy cartridges like 25-06 and or 257 Weatherby to use those newer higher BC bullets as well. Now, I keep talking about Weatherby. That is a company with a lot of love for 25 caliber cartridges. In fact, they are the only company that makes rifles in 25-06 Remington right now, right? Not even Remington makes rifles in their old cartridge. And of course, they also have the 257 Weatherby. Will we potentially see some Weatherby rifles with a 1 in 7.5 or 1 in 8 twist that are chambered in 25-06 or 257 Weatherby? Now, Browning did that with the 270 Winchester after the 6.8 Western hit the market. Not all of their 270s they made had that twist rate, but certain variants of their X-Bolt rifles did, and so they could use like that 165 grain AccuBond long range. Maybe we will see that here too. Heck, compared to even just 5 years ago, we now have a much better selection and an improving selection of higher BC 25 cal bullets that can utilize those faster twist rates. So maybe we'll see a move by certain manufacturers to take advantage of that, adapt some of their existing chamberings to use those bullets. Perhaps we will also see another new 25 caliber cartridge designed for use with high BC bullets come out in the next couple of years. geez, maybe we'll see a 25 PRC from Hornady, maybe a 25 backcountry from Federal using the 7 backcountry model of a high-pressure steel case that can also utilize those higher BC bullets. I would not be surprised at all to see something like that offers 257 Weatherby-like performance, heck, maybe even better performance, but do so out of a smaller case that uses a bullet like the ELDX or the ELDM or something like that has less wind deflection, less recoil, and less muzzle blast than Roy Weatherby's Golden Boy from the 1940s. So those are both possibilities, but also, to paraphrase Will Ferrell, maybe something really cool that I don't even know about or can't imagine is coming down the pipe, too. I personally like the rifle I have in 25 Creedmoor. I have enjoyed hunting and shooting with it over the past few months, and I will continue to do so as well. We'll see what the future holds for this cartridge. Tell me what you think. Shoot me an email, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com, or leave a comment with your thoughts. Also, if you are listening to this episode on Spotify, be sure to answer the poll there. Let me know what you think of the 25 Creedmoor versus the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, as you may know, I am both a fan of and an investor in North Fork bullets. Our fantastic semi-Spitzer bullet is available in both 257 and 264 caliber. That bullet is an excellent choice for those who want a hammer of a bullet to use in either cartridge that is suitable for the whole spectrum of game this side of Cape Buffalo at close range. Something like an ELDX is much better for use at extended range, but I personally think a North Fork semi-Spitzer is ideal at shorter ranges. You can order some North Fork bullets in 257 or 264 or some other caliber yourself at thebiggamehuntingblog.com/NF. That'll take you straight to the North Fork website. Midway USA also sells our bullets. Go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/NF Midway. That will take you to the North Fork section of the Midway website. Both of those links are in the episode description. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and I can help. Thanks for listening. I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.